Hi, people who are live, and hi, everyone who's rewatching. Thank you for coming to our Day 2 Jam Week webinar sessions for the Global Mobility Club at the University of Texas at Dallas. Just a brief introduction to our Global Mobility Club. We want to bring awareness to the pretty niche industry, and just for my UTD students, just to put it simply, it's kind of a mix of the global business and the human resource management majors. So we're working with FEM this year, and we're hosting a career fair and a case competition, so please stay tuned for those. And we're also having another session this afternoon and 2 more sessions tomorrow morning and afternoon as well. So thank you for joining today. Today we have a presentation on COVID-19 from Kathy and Tanya. Kathy will be beginning first and Tanya will be going second. So I want to introduce our speakers for you guys. So Kathy has over 28 years of experience in relocation, real estate, and management, providing an exemplary level of service and quality for service clients and relocating employees. She currently leads the global advisory team for Sirva and works with current and potential clients to ensure that their mobility programs for providing support and governance are necessary to align with defined organizational and talent objectives and priorities. I apologize if I butchered that last sentence. And for Tanya has over 15 years of global talent mobility experience with over 10 years in leadership roles and international assignments in both Asia and Europe. She's a board director of the Worldwide ERC and Corporate Action Network and an advocate for a nonprofit called the Move for Hunger that focuses on sustainability and food insecurity. So as you can tell, we have 2 very experienced professionals to give their presentations today. Stay tuned, and I'm going to let Kathy begin because we are at 11:01 now. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Kathy, you can start sharing your screen if you are ready.
All right, can you see my screen? Excellent, so thank you. So I'm going to kick us off by exploring the impact of the pandemic on the mobility space as the lens of a relocation provider and the suppliers that support mobility for a corporate client. And so with that, when the pandemic hit and we started to see its impacts, it really had us stop in our boots, literally, and shift our focus away from the normal way that we looked at providing support for organizations. And the first area that we focused on was really the contingency plans that companies started to put in place and the stress that started to put on the employees from a cash flow perspective. So as companies went to help their employees, whether they were trapped in a location, if they were trying to come home, or if they were being supported in their current location during the pandemic, there was additional support that cost money. And so Sirva was able to help companies provide more cash in pockets, provide direct bill for support, and coordinate services for employees. It also impacted timelines, and it was really important for the suppliers to be able to provide insight to the corporate clients and the employees, the impacts that the timelines would experience and what that meant. And it was a very fluid time where things started and stopped, and then they changed overnight again. So it was an activity that we handled on a day-to-day, hourly basis, providing insight back into the employees that were relocating and the corporate clients. And then with these delays and this additional support came unplanned expenses. So it was working with mobility teams to understand what kinds of expenses they might have to incur and how these delayed timelines were going to impact their costs. And then it was working with all the suppliers that support the mobility functions, because not only were they dealing with their own impact of the pandemic, but then they were trying to provide support for the employees that were either in the middle of a relocation who were on assignment, and trying to understand with them what could be done, what could not be done, how partial support could be provided, how we could remove support into a virtual arena to still get the job done and still move talent. because once the initial impact of the pandemic subsided, we did still need to move people, whether we were moving people back to their home location, we were still facilitating assignments, and some industries still needed to move people because they were essential types of support that were critical during the pandemic. So we provided a lot of guidance and strategic guidance on how to move people during a pandemic. And then we also provided additional support because as the pandemic expanded, the support that mobility teams were providing for their organizations expanded as well. And in many cases, mobility teams were shrunk and they needed the extra support and expertise of their mobility partners to help them provide this additional support for their employees, not only just their mobile employees, but we found that we were supporting employees that were currently in their own home locations and leveraging the support of like immigration and tax providers and destination providers to provide that additional assistance for even the general population of employees during the pandemic. So let's take a look at how the way that we deliver mobility has changed and that kind of long-term impact. And it really starts off, I think, with having a discussion about the relocation consultant that supports the employee during the relocation of their assignment. And pre-pandemic, most of our, counselors worked in an office. Some had hybrid work environments, some worked remotely. It was a very logistics-focused kind of transaction, helping someone from point A to B, coordinating services. Many times those services were one and done, and they were completed. And the focus was really on a good experience that was efficient, that was friendly, and it provided some cost savings with that efficiency. And as a result of the pandemic, most of our workers are still remote. Many offices closed, and the offices that did open, the workers do have a hybrid work environment. So we have moved to a more virtual support with our relocation consultants. And even in this kind of post-pandemic era that we have now, it's no longer a one and done with support. So for example, immigration may be started and stopped a couple times before it can be completed. Housing searches may need to be started a couple times before it's completed. So the interaction with the relocation consultant is more strategic now versus transactional. And much of the support is very customized to the employee and their family as well, because of these different types of situations that are happening that need to be coordinated. And when looking at the service coordination in itself, pre-pandemic, we had, managed supplier networks. We had great statements of work with our providers. We had location-specific support to handle nuances for different locations. It was very traditional, very hands-on, very focused on efficiency and cost savings. Post-pandemic, we really see the continuation of the fluid management and partnership with suppliers, understanding specific location impacts that are still happening today, capacity strategies for when supply and demand interplay with how support can be provided, and really providing more of a scorecard kind of approach of availability versus just we have providers, but the providers that we have, what is the availability? What does their pipeline look like? How are they delivering services? So it's a much more interactive and strategic kind of support with the coordination of services. We've also seen that much of that support could be done virtually that happened during the pandemic. So we see some of that support continuing on in a post-pandemic, but also the support has a little bit of a different focus where the organizations had really tuned into duty of care. So a lot of the support is also taking into account duty of care and how they are providing the support, not that it's just provided. So that really leads into the changing norms that we see in the mobility space. And pre-pandemic, the mobility space didn't change a whole lot. It was kind of slow to change. It usually involved some kind of change in a law or changes within the world as far as where people were moving to and from a popularity standpoint. Many mobility programs were decentralized, and the focus was really on compliance and cost when looking at a mobility program. Post-pandemic, through the pandemic, we were just fluid with change all the time. So change is not an uncommon thing now in the mobility space. So we see more formal contingency plans and delegation of authority to the providers to help assist with things versus going through a more formal process of exception management. And so we have a more centralized coordination of mobility programs, which makes the governance a lot easier and it's easier to manage. But we also see this big focus on the duty of care of the support that's being to be provided to the employees. So we see that changing program support. So where we went traditionally pre-pandemic with permanent transfers, assignments that were aligned with best practices and industry practices, and we collected data in kind of a data warehouse environment where we were kind of rear view mirror looking at our data to tell us how it was performing. We became really good in the pandemic of using data and on a daily basis to be more analytic, more predictive, more forward thinking of anticipating what our employees need, how the support needs to change, and to be very nimble with the support that we can provide the organization versus being very static. We saw a lot of organizations post-pandemic instituting mitigation plans, risk mitigation plans, and contingency plans more formally that had worked really well for them during the pandemic. And then when looking at technology, pre-pandemic, technology was really focused on anywhere, anytime access to technology, integrating in systems, and providing some innovation. Where I feel the pandemic was really the springboard to aggressively fast track technology. We found ourselves using in technology in ways that we never thought we could. Virtually doing things that we thought had to be done face to face with people in the past, we now realize we could use technology to do that. So we're now seeing advancements in APIs and machine learning to take that even further. And we're really excited about what that space could look like in a future state. So keep your eye on the technology innovations in mobility. So with that, I thought it would be helpful to understand how the face of mobility policies has changed and the support that organizations are providing their employees. So when you look at pre-pandemic, it was very common for companies to have a relocation policy. Here are your benefits, here's the process you're going to follow, here's how we're going to address, compliance with tax and immigration. There's going to be some components of safety built into your policy. If you're on assignment, if something happens, we have some contingency plans for exporting you out of the country that you're in. And there were typical milestones that we checked in with you as a normal course of your relocation of your assignment. But during the pandemic, we had to shift. We were really providing real-time solutions and real-time tracking of employees, which really changed, not necessarily hard-coded into the policy documents themselves, but the policy processes and guidelines that supported those policies. And we became more sophisticated using the technology and the data to help mobility teams understand where their people were, what kinds of support did they need, and forward think support that they might need given certain conditions that would come up or certain scenarios that would come up. So we had more formal contingency plans put in place that allowed us to move very quickly to help address needs. When plan A didn't work, we had plan B and C ready to go to pull off the shelf to help the employee right away and not have to maneuver through a whole series of exception processes. There was a big focus on mental health and physical health of the employee, and we saw companies drawing in from their benefits programs more support into their mobility programs and expanding that support, and also communicating more frequently with them employees. And we mean communicating with how are you doing? What kinds of support do you need? Not just checking in when certain activities were completed. And we were using multiple ways to communicate with the employees. We were using text messaging, phones, emails, apps, any way that we could communicate with the employee, we were to make sure that they were safe, that they had what they needed, and listening to the additional support that they might need. We fine-tuned evacuation processes and protocols that many companies had never had to implement before. And we also reacted very expansively into the scope of work that we were supporting. So not only from the mobility side, but also from the supplier side, our scope of work and support expanded significantly. With post-pandemic, we've applied the lessons learned from the pandemic, designing programs and processes that now hard code this additional support, these changes in the duty of care of how we would like to see support provided for the employees. Taking a look at making sure that we're well focused on not only their physical well-being, but their mental well-being, and then also blending in DE&I and sustainability initiatives. Because even in this time of the last couple years where we've been so focused on the pandemic and remobilizing people, DE&I and sustainability are still very important to organizations and are being blended into the face of new mobility policies. So when you look at policies going forward, to understand where we're headed, you need to understand the drivers that are really pushing the change for mobility and for programs. And I've highlighted some of the drivers here for you to kind of walk you through. I think front and center is always compliance. It's tax and immigration and making sure that everything is compliant with those two lanes. That will always be a huge driver behind how programs are designed and the components that are offered in policies. But we also, as I've mentioned earlier, this change in perspective of duty of care, of understanding, I think, during the pandemic, we had a greater appreciation of the impact that mobility can have on an employee and their family, and the impact that mobility and suppliers can have on that process. And applying that knowledge to how benefits are provided within a policy, not only that they are just offered, but how are they provided and how they can be customized for an employee and their family to be more meaningful, has been a driver around changes to policy that we've seen. We've also seen the sustainability goals being more visible within policies, not only having the goals and helping align with the goals, but providing visibility to the employee as they go through their relocation, how they can align with their goals and support their goals through activities they might not have thought about as they're going through their relocation. And as people, go through their relocation and we're mobile now again, we still have mobility challenges. Some of them are a leftover from the pandemic. Some of them are just coming forward, like economic challenges that we have with, recession, high interest rates, high cost of living. We still have some logistics challenges, and we have supply and demand issues, whether it be from housing, short-term housing, permanent housing in many locations around the world, but also supply and demand as locations now become more up and running. Some of our suppliers are still getting up and running with their staff to full capacity. So it's really important to be closely tied to understand the provider's capabilities in particular locations as more companies come on board with moving people like they used to. But we also see this changing dynamic of what employees expect. And we started to hear it from the recruiting side, from recruiters, understanding different needs that our employees are asking for as they try to recruit them. We also see that translating into the mobility space. And when you look at the diverse population that your employee base may have, you may have boomers to Zs. And those employees have very different ways at looking at information, how they learn, how they use technology. And that's really driving a lot of the innovation and the changes that we see in policies right now. And how do you design a program that can support all those different types of people and how they absorb information and want to be supported in a way that's not just one size fits all. Companies are focusing not only on the experience of the employee, but also their internal business stakeholders to make sure that the policies and the strategies that they have in place are supporting the business strategies. But we also have very unpredictable work environments still. We have new workforce models. We have changing dynamics of companies as they reshape themselves. And while they may be working in one location or recruiting from one location, that may change as their talent strategies and their business strategies change. And mobility needs to be prepared to help shift if they need to support those different kinds of strategies. We're still having our war on talent. We still need to really work closely with the talent groups to understand what is appealing, what kinds of benefits need to be in addition to what we have today, if they're having trouble recruiting people. And all of these drivers really kind of culminate with what we're seeing right now is an increase in reimagine exercises, where organizations have really understood the changing dynamics that they're seeing and their company's strategies, and that mobility is no longer a logistics function. It is really part of the overall strategy of a company with their talent, their recruiting, their growing of their talent internally, and focusing on how can we build a program that best supports those initiatives going forward. So we see that this year as a big focus for most of the companies that we work with, relooking at their policies, relooking at their programs and their processes to make sure that they can support their organizations. So that's just a little bit of an insight into the relocation management company space. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to give us a more focused view from the client side.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. Everyone, just give me 1 second to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen now? You know what? Actually, give me 1 second. Let me try something different. I've got put it in slideshow. How about now?
You're good.
Perfect. Thank you. So again, Nafisa, thank you for the intro, and Kathy, just a perfect tee up. So Tanya Mariottini, I lead our corporate mobility team here at Twilio. And so I'm going to give you a click down into what it actually looks like on the corporate side. So to start with, again, pre-COVID, what was it like from a corporate perspective during the pandemic? How did everything really shift and change for our function? And then just some of my thoughts about the future, where we're headed as an organization and what that looks like for other companies. So first of all, pre-COVID. So I would say we had, like, from a policy perspective, a very standard suite of policies, moving folks, international assignments, tax support. From a support perspective, both for relocation and tax support and immigration support, very logistical, I think, as Kathy used the word, case management. We were doing initiations, we're doing employee inquiries, very, very administrative heavy, focused on policy administration. Same with immigration, green cards, permanent residency, visa casework, et cetera. Really, I would say, was like the bulk of the work that an internal mobility team did. We worked with our supplier partners to deliver the services, but again, very logistical oriented. We had processes. I'm always like, we had processes, but one of the challenges, and it was really more into technology, is that the mobility population for any company is somewhere between like 10 to maybe 20-25% of your total population. I always argue, because this is like your key talent, even though it doesn't touch every single employee, it is those employees that you really want to invest in and have invested in. You've moved them, you've sent them on assignment. All of these things are very expensive, but oftentimes, because the function doesn't touch every single employee, you just don't get the investments. So when it comes to technology, I would say most companies, maybe some still today, like Excel, Google Sheet trackers, you're tracking information very manually. There's not a lot of reporting and not a lot of support and resourcing and budget and funding for reporting. And it was really focused on more traditional, what is your volume? What are you projecting your volume for next year? What is your spend? What do you think you'll be spending? So I would say, again, very traditional program. The other challenge pre-COVID, and I want to share it because I think that it evolved as we went forward, is that mobility was very much a function that was an afterthought. And I don't want to say always, but oftentimes the business would have a conversation and they would decide that they need to move a population of people or even an individual, and mobility would find out after the decision was made. And it was more of a, hey, can you execute on this? Which often caused challenges, because without understanding some of the regulations, compliance, hey, I want so-and-so there tomorrow. And you're like, hey, that's great, but it takes 6 months to get a visa. And they're like, that won't work for us. So a lot of times the mobility would be, on the back end of finding out, and we weren't a strategic part of the conversation pre-COVID, but that all changed. So, oops, it skipped the slide. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. So, okay. So during the pandemic, immediately we had all these displaced employees, and I'm going to share a little story with you about one specific employee, because I think it will really hit it home. But we had employees who were traveling on business. We had employees who went home for personal trips on vacation. And all of a sudden, because of COVID and COVID restrictions, they were stuck essentially outside of their country of employment. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Can we employ them? We don't know if we can. Do they need a visa? And mobility was uniquely positioned. We know what all the regulations are. And we have, as Kathy shared, we've got these great supplier partners all around the world who can help us figure this out. So immediately, overnight, we got this influx of like, oh my gosh, like the business needs help. Like we've got to keep these people employed. Like what can we do? And the story I wanted to share with you is we had a software engineer based in San Francisco on an H-1B visa. He went home to China. He got stuck in China. And as many of you know, China had some of the strictest COVID quarantines and regulations. And so he couldn't get out. In addition to that, we don't have a legal entity in China. So he couldn't work for us in China at the time. So we ended up getting him a visa to Ireland. He worked in Ireland for us for like a year and a half. And then we were finally able to get him an appointment because the consulates were so backed up, to get an appointment so he could get a visa stamp so he could come back to the US. And that's just an example. But again, we had great supplier partners who helped us figure out all of these different pieces of the logistics. And this is really, again, where the shift started to take place, because we started to work with all of these internal stakeholders. And I don't think they realized the value that our function could bring and the expertise that we had. And so instead of, again, telling us like, hey, by the way, we're going to be moving so-and-so, can you execute this? They're like, oh, wow, like mobility could really be a partner with us and they understand. And if we brought them in early to this decision, like they could help us, make an informed decision about which location we should go to because of the tax costs or how long the immigration would take. And so I would say like this, as unfortunate as the pandemic was, it really put global mobility in the spotlight, and it really changed our dynamics and position within the company. And so, we already had these great relationships with corporate tax and legal and all of these other teams, but it really like solidified and built upon those. And then in addition, really with our supplier partners, because as Kathy shared, it was a lot of like, they executed on the logistics, like we needed you to move someone and they moved someone. But this changed because I don't even know how we're going to move someone, or like, we need to do this virtually. And like, I told everyone, like, there is no playbook for this. Like, we are figuring this out together. And so I think it really elevated the partnership, but I think it elevated the work across the entire supply chain, corporate and all of our suppliers. And then as we kind of got closer to the end of what I'm going to call COVID, it's really that pivot to say like, okay, we figured out all our displaced employees. We've built all these really great relationships, and, we've really elevated the work that we do. But now, like, what is the future of work and what does remote work look like? And Kathy touched on this as well. Like, employees want different things now, right? And that has evolved. And so we were a key stakeholder in part of building, like, what is the future of remote work like? Like, what are we going to allow short-term, long-term? We're actually a fully remote company, which is a very interesting, but we've got hybrid arrangements. We still do have offices. So, but it really shifted that. And again, we were a key part of that conversation because we had all of these like little key bits and pieces of information that was so critical to unlock that. So it was really, the pandemic really shifted things for us. And then I wanted to do a little like, okay, so post-COVID. So same slide to kind of like compare. So pre-COVID, post-COVID, one of the things that we rolled out, and it says duty of care, but really we had such an influx of requests for employee-initiated moves. And we wanted to support them. Like, again, we want to create this environment for our employees, but we didn't have kind of the foundation for that. So we created a duty of care policy, and employees have some flexibility about working internationally in other locations, but there are minimum requirements that the company wants to make sure that we support for them. In addition, just to reiterate, all of our policies are under review for a post-pandemic world. Like, what does this look like? Because the policies we had before are not the policies that we need going forward. And we need that flexibility. We need that customization. We still want employees to have a great experience. And so we've started that journey right now. So again, just reiterating and supporting what Kathy shared, she's seen all her clients do. We are doing that as well. When it comes to the support that we've been providing, we have, oh my goodness, so we have so much more integrations and automations with all of our supplier partners. We have really shifted as a function to being more of a business consultant in a much more strategic role. And so we've really leveraged our partners and increased the scope of services with our partners to do a lot of this casework. But also, I'm a big believer that anything that could be like, there's certain work I don't think should be done by like a human being. And there's certain work that like technology used to do for us. And I'm excited about what's on the front with AI and other things, but like work should be exciting and value add, and it should take some like brain matter to do. So we've really, especially as a tech company, like we've really looked to automate a lot of the transactional tasks and get away from that. As examples, again, Kathy mentioned APIs. We've got Workday integrations for initiations. We've got Workday integrations for our data feeds with our suppliers so that they can get real-time data on hierarchy changes and cost center changes and all of the other information, email addresses, et cetera. So it's been a huge savings for our team. So again, we can really focus on where we can add value. And then from a processes and technology, I feel like everything just got blew up during the pandemic, but in a really good way. So I mentioned earlier, one of our challenges really pre-pandemic was we don't touch every employee. You know, we're just touching, you know, a percentage, you know, 10, 25%, depends on your company and what your mobile population looks like. And so we just really weren't getting the support for resourcing. But all of a sudden, when we were kind of pushed into the forefront, there was just so much support. And I would say across the company, from business leaders, from other teams in HR, from stakeholders, like, hey, like this is really important. And so because of that, we've really been able to build out our processes. We've moved a lot into ServiceNow, which is a case management tool a lot of folks may be familiar with. We've got a lot more resources for employees that they can self-help. We've also have a shared service center. If folks are familiar with that, it's where you centralize more, I'll call it transactional, but repeatable tasks basically into a group. And so we hadn't really gotten the support to do that before, and we were able to enable that. And then when it comes to technology, I'm so excited because like before I was telling you like, hey, we had like a report on volume or spend, or I could tell you who our top suppliers were. And we kind of talk about like, oh, like, is there an opportunity here or there? We now have built out on Tableau. We've got customer facing analytic dashboards. We can tell you in real time because we've got real time data feeds, like what is the volume of our program and where did people go? And, you know, what is their immigration status, and just different information that we always had, but we didn't really have the resources and capacity. And there was maybe not really an interest actually from a lot of customers about what was going on with the mobile population. And since the pandemic, there really is. And because of that, we've gotten the investment, we've gotten the resources to really build this out. And then the other thing, again, you know, we are very focused, I think as a company, but even as an industry, on providing a really high touch experience. And we've also built out these really great employee experience surveys, which are so insightful because we know that the policies need to evolve. We know that the support we provide needs to continue to evolve. And this is just a really nice way for us to get some insight. The other thing that I didn't mention too, when it comes to some of the support, and Kathy touched on this as well, is that we have really tried to empower our suppliers. So we have created, you know, process documents, we've created exception guidance, we've created all kinds of things to say like, hey, we are the same team, you are an extension of us, and we want to make sure that you're set up to be successful. So a lot of effort and time has gone into that as well. So then I want to get on to what I think that I am most excited about, and that is really, what is the future, right? And I don't think any of us know, but one of the things that I really want to start with is that there's all of this like new normal. What is normal? What's the new normal going to be? And my take is there is no new normal, right? Like I think that we work now in such an interconnected global environment that it's going to constantly be shifting, and maybe the pandemic spurred it, but there's all these other things too. And Kathy highlighted some of them. We've got inflation, we've got the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've got other geopolitical things that are at work, right? Like that all impacts the landscape we work in, which makes it highly exciting and interesting. But at the same time, I don't think like everyone's kind of like, when will it get back to the way that it used to be kind of attitude or mentality? And I'm like, it's not. Like, I just don't think we ever go back to like, hey, and it's a steady state. And, you know, and both of us, I think as Nafisa shared, we have a lot of experience. So like a number of years of my career, you kind of did the same thing and you iterated it, and depending on the company and what sector you were in and the culture, like you might do slightly different things, but kind of the overall package was the same. I just don't think that's the case going forward, right? Like we are redefining and reshaping the future, which is super exciting. So with that, really from big focus areas for us. So one is first-class advisory services. So we are no longer your logistic function. We are no longer the team that you come to and be like, okay, we've decided to send Nafisa to wherever, like make it happen because I said so. We're really recognized by the business as a subject matter expert, and they really see the value that we can bring. And that goes to also like this strong internal brand. Like, I don't know if everybody really knew what global mobility did or who we were or what our purpose was. And I think because of the pandemic, and a lot of folks in mobility talk about it, so I'll say it, it probably won't resonate with the students, but mobility for a long time has said, like, we really want a seat at the table. Like we want to be part of the decision-making. And we a lot of times haven't felt like we were, whether you wanted to be or not during the pandemic, like you were thrust into that position. So I think it's a really positive. We've really been able to establish ourselves with our internal brand. And then as far as the strategic scope, we again, the business just looks at us differently. And I wanted to give a few examples of what that is. So for instance, there's a lot of different M&A activity that is always happening, I think, at any corporation. We're part of the M&A team. Like we are regularly invited to be part of those conversations. And I can't say that that was always the case in the past. I'd also say, even though it's been over a year now, when the Russia invasion of Ukraine first happened, like we immediately were on a core team with senior leadership, C-suite leadership, to talk about what this meant for our employees, what support we could provide them. We brought in our suppliers, we put contingency plans together. Like we were there and we were in the thick of it. And I can honestly say, I'm not sure pre-pandemic that the business would have thought about us in that same way. And the other, again, I've talked about a little bit, is just this investment and this support to really scale our function through automation and efficiency and look at ways of doing things differently. And I would say it's not because we didn't want to before, but again, we weren't always resourced. It was like, well, mobility doesn't touch every employee. So, when push comes to shove or there are budget constraints, we wouldn't always get it. So it's really exciting. The other thing I would say is that the capabilities required in mobility have also evolved. And, what I'm thinking about that and what I'm looking for is like, you really have to be able to problem solve in a lot of very ambiguous situations. Again, there is no playbook. We are figuring this out as we go. And then there's also this important need to be able to make connections upstream and downstream and really understand the impact, right, within the business, within different legislation, regulations, et cetera. So again, it's really, I think, shifted our function, but in a really positive way. So then when I think about the employee experience, I feel like we've always been very, very high touch, but I think even more so. And we're really focused on, and I would say this is not just for mobility, this is for our entire HR people team, is like creating optimized, tailored solutions for customers, but they have to be flexible and they have to have a lens of diversity, right? So we want everybody to be able to be supported in the way that they need to be supported. And we also want to provide this real high touch support. And I really like the way Kathy said it. It's not, in the past, we just checked in with you at like key milestones, like, hey, you hit this milestone, like everything good, okay, great. Going forward, it's a much different way of engaging with customers and really making sure that they have what they need to be successful. And again, there's no playbook, and every customer and every business unit is going to be a little different. And you have to really figure out how best to manage that. On the technology enabled, so I always say this, but our customers, and especially the younger generation, like the way they want to engage with mobility is the way they engage with technology in their personal life. And I would say oftentimes mobility tech is very clunky and it's not intuitive. And so there's been a shift in the entire industry to really make sure that all of the solutions that have they're employee centric, they have the employee in mind. And again, when you engage with the mobility technology, it's just like the way you engage with normal technology in your regular life. So I think we'll continue to see that evolve. And then there's always it's this fine balance between being high touch, providing employee support, and being fiscally responsible. And I just wanted to call that out because a lot of companies, and I'm in tech, obviously it's an interesting environment right now. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it politically correctly. And so I think just being fiscally responsible is important too. And there's a way to do that. There really is, to find that balance. And then the other thing that was always important, but I think is even more so important, is just being compliance led. The tax, the immigration landscape is evolving. We've got these global nomad visas now that we never had before. Some countries, tax laws have kept up with remote work, some haven't. It's very interesting. And so trying to figure out also, again, how to navigate that. And it goes back to being a real subject matter expert and business consultant. I'd also say, like, we obviously leverage really great partners who help us navigate this landscape as well, because, we operate in 20 some countries. You can't keep up on all the immigration and tax regulations everywhere, but we've got great partners who can help us navigate that. But that really continues to be one of our main pillars. Again, so important to have technology for this. Again, Kathy touched on it as well. Like before, we had, again, Google Sheet, Excel tracker, kind of loosely knew where people were at. Like now, it is so important to know where your employees are. And I feel like we also, again, goes back to duty of care, but we as a company are so great. If there's something that happens, an earthquake, a tornado, hurricane, we reach out to, like, we want to know that you're okay. And we want to check in with you. And we can only do that if we actually know where you are, and being remote or hybrid or these different, like, you're not in an office. So the technology underpinning a lot of this is really important. And then again, we have always been a very values-led organization, but we are definitely, as part of our, I kind of put it on this, under this pillar, I wasn't sure where to put it, but supplier diversity and sustainability requirements and reporting. And we have this expectation of ourselves as a company, but part of our commitment is to make the world a little bit better place as well. So we have these commitments or requests from our supplier partners. So it really kind of factors into this overall experience that we want to provide. So this is just like my thoughts about the future of mobility. I think it's really exciting. And again, I don't think there's this new normal or this steady state, or that we go back to the way that things used to be. I think that we're building and shaping what it looks like. And these are some of the places where we really have the ability to show up. And I feel like, again, pandemic really kind of jarred us out of that, gave us a spotlight within our companies, and repositioned us to be a much more strategic partner, which I'm hoping, my peers, our suppliers, like, we're all really embracing that and excited about the future. So that is the end. Thank you so much for letting myself and Kathy share a little bit with you. And I know we've got a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully we can address some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Tanya. Great presentation. So yes, we have 5 questions. So the first question was, what do you think will be the long-term impact of the pandemic on global mobility and talent management? So I'm going to hand it off to you guys.
Well, Tanya, you kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. Maybe you take that one.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, so I would say, I think that, so when it comes to talent and talent management or talent in general, I will say that different companies have different strategies. And if you are a manufacturing company, or you are in the medical industry, like, you obviously need people to be in office, and they need to be in office full time, right? And you also, manufacturing, I just think of this, like, you need a lot of land, and there are different reasons, right? So I just, like, from a talent management perspective, your talent strategy will be different. Every company has a different talent strategy. I would say, as a mobility function, what you can do is work with your talent team to understand that strategy and how your program can best enable it, because it will be a little bit different. As far as how mobility has changed, I think the biggest change is just the types of programs and the support that we are going to provide going forward. And it's not the benefits, it's the who moves. It's, again, we're getting more employee requested moves. There are different expectations. There's a different level of support being provided. So, it just is less of the traditional, like, I don't know how to put it, but because like, people aren't widgets, but like, it was just like, okay, we moved 100 people and they all had the same package, and like, okay, that's what we did last year. This year, maybe it's like, okay, we moved 100 people, but like they all had like slightly different packages, and like half of them wanted to move and half of them the company wanted to move. Like it's a very different landscape for mobility, which again, I think is very exciting. And again, I feel like we're, kind of been out the pandemic a little bit, but not everybody, like everybody came out at different times, and there's backlogs for immigration. Like it's still a little bit of a mess out there. So I think we're still figuring out like exactly what mobility will evolve to, and talent management as well. Like we're fully remote. Other companies have hybrid or fully in office strategies. And so I think there'll be a spectrum, which is really great because they're, different things for different people. And Kathy, I don't know, again, please feel free to add on anything else you have.
I would agree 100% with what you said. I think the pandemic as well has heightened those core competencies that mobility can help with, that will help strategically where you're looking for people and what you're offering. So in some cases, I've seen examples where recruiters are looking in Europe for a particular to fill a spot where the packages being offered may not be considered competitive for those groups of people. We're looking in a different location or a different country, you might have a better adoption rate or acceptance rate. So sometimes even just that insight that mobility can provide as far as the benefits of somebody moving from one location to another, what might be attractive or not attractive, has been super helpful for the recruiting and talent perspective.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you think the pandemic has changed the way employees and companies approach international assignments? And I think you both kind of just touched on that, but if you want to add.
Sure. Yeah, there's kind of this buzz going around. There's no more assignments, which is not what we're seeing. We're still seeing assignments are critical for many organizations and many talent initiatives. So we're seeing assignments being used for different types of roles now, technical types of roles, where people are coming in from other countries into a different type of country to shadow a position for a period of time, and then take that to their home country or take it to another location. So we're seeing, in the past, assignments were like developmental, they were expansion, they were filling a spot where somebody may have been on, maternity leave or left the company unexpectedly, and they kind of filled in a hole. We're now seeing assignments more of learning jobs and taking that knowledge and moving it someplace else. So we're seeing it used just slightly differently, but we do see some companies backing away from them just because of the cost, and finding, again, through virtual over the last 2 years, finding out you can do some of that virtually and not actually have to go on an assignment. What do you see, Tanya?
Yeah, so I agree with what you shared, and I would just reiterate that there we are kind of in a cost constrained environment, so I think there is more scrutiny on assignments, but I don't like, this is great. Like Zoom is great. Like it's lovely. We couldn't do this, all of us travel and meet up. But at the same time, there's something to be said about actually being there in person. And, depending on the purpose of the assignment, like understanding the culture, meeting the people, working with the team, understanding the work that this is great. But I just would say like, you can't do that. So I don't think international assignments are ever going away. I do think, folks are looking at, could you do more business travel plus Zoom? And then I would just also add to exactly what you said or reiterate is that the purpose for assignments have evolved. And again, we're seeing more kind of employee requests as well, like really this desire, like I want to have an opportunity, or I know in order to continue to grow my career that I need to have like more of a world mindset or like this experience, and I can only get this technical experience in this country. So I think we're seeing a shift. But yeah, I have heard that too, like international assignment is dead. It's not going anywhere. It just, again, everything we used to do just looks a little bit differently going forward.
Thank you so much. That was actually a question I had too. So thank you for clearing that up. Another question we have, I notice Ireland comes up quite often when talking about mobility. Why is that the case? Is it especially easy to get a work visa there?
So Ireland is a lot of countries are regionally hubbed out of Ireland. It is an easier country from a work authorization perspective. What I will say, however, is though, because at least this has been our experience, Kathy will probably know better than me, because there are so many companies in Ireland, there are other challenges, like there's not enough corporate housing. By the way, finding housing can be really difficult. Like, so every country has different things, but most companies do have kind of regional hubs. For us, Ireland happens to be our EMEA regional hub. I know it is for lots of other companies too. So, but it is like my example I gave with our software engineer from China. Yes, during the pandemic, one of the easiest locations to get somebody into, for us at least, and where we had a legal entity, was Ireland. So it just is a matter of fact. And Kathy, please again share.
Yeah, it'll be different. So I see some organizations, and we work with some mobility leaders, where they really forward think and understand, you know, a risk mitigation is, here's all my assignees, here's all the passports that they hold in their nationalities. If something happens in this location and I need to move people quickly, where can I move them fast?
Mm-hmm.
And where can I move them? If I can't move them, for example, if my headquarters is in the US and I can't just move them to the US and I have to park them, you'll hear that term, parking them someplace. If I have to park them someplace that will give them a better advantage to get into the US, you work out that ahead of time so that you have it ready to pull off the shelf when something does happen. And so I think, again, that's something that some companies did a lot of proactive work with, especially, you know, pre-pandemic, when, you know, HB1s, you know, we sold out like immediately, right? And we had people that we didn't want to lose, and we parked them in different places of the world. I think that's where we see some of that core competency coming in right now with mobility teams and that expertise. So it's not just that particular location, it's whatever works best for that company and where they have their entities and where their people's personal situations will allow them to move quickly.
Thank you. We're actually getting a lot of questions.
Oh, great.
I know, I see them all coming in.
Oh, good. Oh, fantastic. Let's do this. We'll be faster at answering.
Yeah.
No worries. How did companies balance the need for business continuity with the health and safety concerns of employees when managing during and after the pandemic?
So I will just say, from my perspective, the health and safety of the employee was number one, period. And then, you know, anything that was offered as far as like even support to relocate or move around was first consulted with the employee if that was something that they were comfortable with before anything would proceed. So not that business continuity wasn't important, but, and again, this, I hope every company feels this way, but really we're very employee centric as a company. And so the employee was the most important factor in that. And if we had to make that other shifts internally for business continuity, we did. And I love what Kathy just said in her last answer too. There has been a lot of contingency planning. And I think contingency planning that never happened before has now happened to figure out like, how do you, right, keep the business running in different places and shift work around if you need to.
Yeah, it was interesting during it, what companies pulled people back and what people wanted to stay. So again, the pandemic was unique because it hit every place. There wasn't any place you could go and not be impacted, right? So at a point, it was like, it was better to just stay in place. But it was really interesting, you know, to hear and see the stories of people that were like, I'm staying in China, I'm staying here, I have an important job to do, we can manage it here, we feel safe here, the company's providing additional support. But even today, you know, we have companies that are providing additional support. Like when the lockdowns happened in China, we have companies that are providing groceries and additional supplies to people that are in lockdown, you know, blocks. So that support is still today. And yes, I would agree 100% with Tanya. It has always been the health and safety forefront beyond anything that was important to the organization. Yep.
Okay, perfect. What do you think will be the key factors that drive demand for international assignments in the post-pandemic world?
So I can start. I would say a factor that always drives it is there still has to be a business need. And so that's the bottom line, like, because it's expensive, right? There are costs involved. So there needs to be a business need for there to be an international assignment. And then, you know, the duration of the assignment, the purpose of the assignment, et cetera. That's where I think that we're seeing different factors or different criteria that the business is using to determine like how they want to, you know, build their talent.
I think it's definitely more strategic than developmental these days. I think, unfortunately, developmental's kind of taken a sidestep to the immediate need of growing the business and bringing in revenue and expansion to offset the losses that were incurred during the pandemic. So I think that's where I see a little bit of a different shift with the goals of some of the assignments.
Thank you. The next question is, has the pandemic changed your perspective on mental health for employees?
Yes. No, I mean, I think it was always, I'd like to think it was always important, but I think it really brought it to the forefront. And there are so many, Kathy should probably speak to this more, she touched it, but we already provide so many resources available to employees, and employees, especially ones moving internationally or going on international assignment. This was already something I feel like Mobility was aware of and had always tried to provide some resources to, but I think even more so. Please, Kathy.
Yeah, I think we talked earlier about having more thoughtful interaction with the employees. It's, pre-pandemic, it was very, see you there, hope it's okay, here's your policy, talk to your counselor, kind of stuff, where now, there is so much more awareness and awareness within the whole organization of the impact of it and what can be done to make it a better experience and to correct things as the employee has challenges. And I think, with the pandemic, companies were looking at it from a very wide lens of the whole population. And so now I think it's just a more acceptable way to look at your population and a more focus on it. So the things that we kind of knew were already happening in mobility now has a more general support within an organization, and not just the mobility people saying, hey, we need some help over here. Yeah.
All right. Next question. How does culture in these different countries affect how you assign people? Do you take into consideration the culture of the person you send, or how adaptable you think they would be?
So I will say we don't use it at Twilio. I have seen other companies. There are some different assessment tools that you can take that can tell you about the culture and kind of how your personal preferences line up with that. I've never used it as a reason not to send someone, but more as an opportunity maybe to provide coaching or additional resources just to set them up, basically to set them up to be successful in the new location. So there are tools and resources that are available. And I don't know, Kathy, you probably have a lot more experience in this too.
Yeah, I think it comes into three arenas if I think about it. One is the front end of the assessment. So especially if you're going to a culture that's dynamically different from where you live today, to have a full understanding of what that means for the employee, and having a self-discovery assessment is truly helpful for them and their family. Cultural training as itself, I'll sound a little bit like a commercial, but I think it's like super important, because it's not just understanding the culture that you're going to go be living in, but it's understanding how your current perceptions of yourself and how you work will either mesh or clash with the culture that you're going into. So the culture that you're working in today, if you do what you do today that's made you successful, it may work against you in the culture that you're going into. So having awareness of that is super important for the success of the relocation, the success of the assignment, the people that they're interacting with, and then also providing ongoing support, because again, it's not a one and done anymore. We've realized that you can provide this cultural training up front. The person says, yep, got it. I've got my list. Everything's going good. And you may check in 6 months and they're struggling. So having the ability to go back in and have that additional support is truly crucial, I think, even on permanent transfers, a year or so after they get into it, to make sure that they are truly successful.
Thank you. So the next two questions, I believe they're a little bit tied together. What lessons do you think global mobility professionals have learned from the pandemic that will inform their approach to managing international assignments in the future? And what is the biggest biggest lesson companies can take away from the pandemic?
Gosh, there's so many.
I was gonna say, I feel like we've touched on a lot of
those. Yeah.
As far as like, can you read the first question again, Nafisa?
Yeah.
So the first question was, what lessons do you think global mobility professionals have learned from the pandemic that will inform their approach to managing international assignments in the future?
I think from my side, just one angle to look at it is I think they understand all the things that can go wrong and the things that could happen, and that, you know, preparing the employee, preparing the business, and then working strategically with their providers to make sure that it is streamlined for the employee. I think before we were very reactive to the process. Oh, this happens. Oh, what do we do now? I think what we've learned is that work that we do up front to be proactive, whether it be with the assignee or with the providers or with the business, really pays off in the long run for an overall success of the assignment and the management of it from the mobility side.
Well said, Kathy.
All right, and this is our last question for the webinar. What advice do you have for global mobility or any industry professionals on how to adapt and adjust to the changing circumstances of the pandemic? I feel like this is a good closing question.
It's a great question. And again, to one of the comments I made about kind of what I think the future of global mobility, but I think it's true for anyone. I think there's some resilience, I think, is a word that came up a lot, but I think being able to be comfortable with ambiguity and being able to navigate through change. And I think there's been a lot of that. And I know that can be really exhausting. And maybe the simple way is just remembering you can only control how you react to something. You can't control what happens. And so it's how you manage through it when different situations arise, because they inevitably will. And again, yeah, that won't just be in global mobility. I think that that's the world that we live in.
I think that the day of operating mobility under the radar is gone. So if you're not comfortable kind of being in that spotlight and being asked, and to be comfortable that your answer may change and the situation may change and you may have to rework it, you need to be comfortable with that and comfortable asking for help. You're not going to do it once and it's going to be done, and the one answer is not going to solve it all the time. There is so much gray. And that you have to be willing to just kind of move through it and keep going and breathe. It will get better. But I think also understanding your partners that you're working with, what skills and things that do they have, so that when something comes up, you know exactly who to call to ask for the help and get the partnership and coordinated, and that you don't have to physically do it yourself. Because I feel like sometimes the mobility people who were used to doing all these transactional things were just overwhelmed with all the things I personally have to do. You have teams, you have these mobility partners to help you with this, and it takes a village a lot of times in these kinds of scenarios to get it done.
And I just, yeah, just to add on though to what you said, Kathy, and now I lost my train of thought. So no, never mind. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for your questions, and thank you to the speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedules to do this and working with the Global Mobility Club that are on campus. If you want to have more information on their experience, they have nice LinkedIns, and this recording will be posted, or it will be sent out to the